Wealth inequality didn't start with capitalism. It started long before markets existed. To understand why inequality feels permanent today, we have to go back to when it first became possible at all. When people talk about wealth inequality, the conversation usually starts with capitalism, corporations, or modern finance. But inequality is much older than that. For most of human history, extreme wealth inequality didn't exist. Not because people were more generous or morally better, but because the structure of society didn't allow wealth to accumulate in the first place. That's important because it tells us something. Inequality isn't just about attitudes or politics, it's about systems. So instead of asking who caused inequality, the better question is what changed that made inequality possible at all? For tens of thousands of years, humans lived as hunter gatherers. Small groups, constant movement, no permanent settlements. These societies still had leaders, social status, and differences in ability. Some people were better hunters, some were better organizers, but they didn't have stored wealth. And here's the key idea: you can't accumulate wealth if you can't store it. Food spoiled quickly, meat had to be eaten or shared, tools were simple and portable, land wasn't owned in the modern sense. Groups used territory, but they didn't fence it off or pass it down as property. If someone tried to hoard resources, they had a problem. They had to carry them. And if someone became too dominant, others could simply leave. Mobility acted as a natural limit on power. Inequality existed socially, but it couldn't compound across generations. There was no mechanism for wealth to snowball. Everything changed when humans began to settle down. Agriculture allowed people to grow food in one place instead of chasing it. And farming created something that had never existed before at scale: surplus. Food could now be produced in excess. It could be stored for long periods of time. And once food could be stored, it could also be guarded, measured, and controlled. This is where wealth inequality begins. And this needs to be said clearly. Agriculture isn't capitalism. It just made inequality possible. The moment surplus existed, decisions had to be made. Who controls the land? Who controls the storage? Who decides how food is distributed during shortages? In early agricultural societies, these roles often fell to elites, religious authorities, or ruling classes. In places like early Mesopotamia, temples and rulers controlled grain storage. That meant they could decide who ate during bad harvests and who didn't. Control over food became control over people. Once surplus existed, society began to reorganize around it. Not everyone had to farm anymore. Some people became guards. Some became administrators. Some became soldiers, craftsmen, or priests. Those who controlled land and storage didn't need to produce food themselves. They lived off the surplus created by others. This wasn't accidental. Surplus allowed power to concentrate. And once power concentrated, it began to protect itself. Land ownership passed to children. Surplus funded guards, administrators, and early armies. Rules were created and enforced to protect property and authority. Wealth didn't just appear. Wealth defended itself. Once inequality took root, it didn't naturally disappear. Because the people with surplus had advantages, they could protect their wealth. They could pass it down to their children, and they could enforce rules that kept the system in place. Over time, these arrangements hardened into institutions: property rights, taxes, tribute, and eventually states. Inequality wasn't a temporary imbalance. It became structural. The basic structure hasn't changed. Replace land with assets. Replace stored grain with capital. Replace guards with institutions. There's one major difference, though. Capital doesn't spoil the way food does. It compounds. And once wealth can compound, inequality accelerates. Wealth inequality didn't begin with capitalism. Capitalism just scaled it. In the next video, we'll look at how money and debt didn't create inequality, but made it permanent, transferable, and global. Because once wealth became abstract, it could move faster than people,